My friend Jim Keys is one of the coolest dudes you will ever meet. He's the former CEO of 7-Eleven and Blockbuster. He is an author and he grew up without plumbing. He has this calming presence that just makes you feel good, almost surreal considering the fact that he was the CEO for such a long period of time. And yet he has such a friendly presence and a warm perspective that just makes you feel better about the world. I had an opportunity to do a few collaborations with him while I was still at my corporate job, and our friendship became a real friendship. So he lets me know every time he's in town. Yesterday, he was speaking at an event at Google. I was trying to schedule 1,000 things throughout the course of the day, but I also wanted to prioritize making time to hang out with Jim. And also to do what I can to pull his insights to the surface so that they can be helpful to you as well. So at first I was going to shoot a new guy piece, and then based off of scheduling conflicts, I'm like, why don't I just give you a ride to this Google event, and I'm going to try to make a podcast out of it. I'm still fumbling my way through all of this, which is why I wanted to talk to Jim about confidence. And it's also why I'm talking to you through my phone right now, because I used my voice memo as a way to record the entire podcast. Very much still making this up as I go, but I think that this conversation can help anybody that's looking for a different perspective on a whole bunch of things in life, and confidence in particular. I think you're going to absolutely love his analogy relative to flying planes and how that can help you in day-to-day situations. Jim is a friend. Jim is somebody that I think anybody can benefit from hearing talk or reading his book, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Private event for Comcast executives.
Cool.
I think to try to sell them on just making more use of all of their different platforms.
Yeah.
And they've got, how many locations do they have over there? It's kind of nuts.
Oh, yeah.
Because they've got do you know which one exactly we're going to?
Yeah, let me give you the address. It's Chelsea, I think it is. It is 650 Washington Street. 550 Washington Street.
And I'm just going to jump right into the conversation.
This route avoids road closures on East 55th Street and on 5th Avenue. You are on the fastest route. You should arrive around 2:50 p.m.
You doing well overall?
Yeah. I've been having fun. This is a new life for me, too. I'm not used to this shit.
And is it just like a mix of making sure you get the right kind of public exposure for book perspective stuff? And
well, it's gone beyond book to an interesting message that's very relevant and timely today. Just about what's going on in society in general. There's so much fear.
At the light, turn right onto Madison Avenue, then turn right onto East.
Misunderstanding, a lot of anger,
Yep.
all that stuff ties back to my book, ironically, because I didn't plan it this way. I wrote the book to inspire young people to use learning, but then I discovered that there's a greater audience out there. It's all about what's going on in the world and how we've replaced our ability to have critical thinking and our, what I call, perspective. Mm-hmm. Being able to step back from issues and really think through what's true and what's not true.
I love the way you say that. I mean, one of the things that hit me based off of all the stuff that's happening in the world is, how did we get to a place where we can sit shoulder to shoulder in massive arenas and, cheer for sports and have in-depth conversations about a lot of things that make us, but then all of a sudden it comes to certain topics and it's just like a hard stop.
Oh, I know. But there's another thing going on. I was just at a UT Oklahoma game. College football in the South is huge, as you know. And UT was crushing, University of Texas was crushing Oklahoma. And this was at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. Mm-hmm. And the crowd started chanting, OU sucks. Fuck OU.
Okay.
And I just, I sat back and I thought, where have we gone as a society where we can't even be good winners?
Yeah.
We've still got to pile on and treat the opponent, even in a sporting venue, as an enemy.
Right. Well, it's like, what's the point? Like, what good is that doing other than, like, maybe you get some sort of false sense of feeling a bit better about your current situation, whether that's sports or otherwise. But, I mean, the amount of yelling that is just ratcheted up, and it's like, okay, the point's been made about whatever the broader topic is that you're making. You're unhappy about X, Y, or Z, and what are we going to do about it? Like, what's the point?
Well, and if you remember, Kim, the subtitle of my book was "The Future Is in Your Hands."
Yep.
And what I'm trying to do as I'm out on this speaking tour is remind everybody that it's up to us individually to take responsibility for our behavior.
Yep, totally.
And even to manage our own, what I call the difference between perceptions and perspective.
Yep.
And that perception is what we form when we turn on the news or page through social media and we see something in it and we believe it. Yep. And it makes us mad. It triggers that reaction of frustration or anger or whatever it is. And that just builds and builds and builds, as opposed to having the ability individually for each of us to step back and have a different perspective.
Yep.
And to think about it.
Yeah.
We're all capable of this, and if we all do it, then all of those people out there together will have a little different point of view, I think, about the world, because this world is a beautiful place, and we don't need to be so bound in anger and frustration.
So how do you make that shift, especially for those that feel like their perception is correct, or whatever they see that justifies their stance? How do you correct that?
Yeah, I think the root cause of a lot of this is fear. And
totally agreed.
People are afraid, and I look around, I think, what in the world are we so afraid of? We're afraid people are going to take something from us, do something to us, and those guys are coming for you, etc. And much of this is manufactured fear, because if you think about it, step back, it sells.
Yeah.
And it motivates an electorate.
Right.
And both sides are guilty of stoking fear for a purpose. But as individuals, again, we can control our reaction to this. And so if we can manage our own fear, and to me, the antidote to fear is knowledge.
Yep. Agreed.
Right? Kid in the dark.
Yep.
I'm scared of the dark. There's a boogeyman under the bed.
Yep.
Your wife comes in, turns on the light. What happens?
Right.
I'm not afraid anymore.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And that's knowledge. That's what knowledge is. So
Yep.
each of us can use knowledge as the antidote to fear. And if each of us does that and takes responsibility for using information, data, facts, truth, then we have nothing to be afraid of. And if we have nothing to be afraid of, then, hopefully that will catch on.
Yeah. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I asked you about from a selfish perspective, which I think ties into this broader topic of how fear can drive your angle about any given topic and just get you stuck in a specific way, is confidence. And, take aside me shifting out of the corporate world, because that was one of our last conversations about staying confident, because there can be this label that you put on yourself, and then how do you become okay with what might happen next, and do you lose your identity, etc. But confidence in general, because throughout the course of your career, you saw a tremendous amount of ups and downs in ways that a lot of other leaders could never even fathom. From a change management perspective, from a PR perspective, right? You told me the story of what happened with Dave Letterman when he went on and said, everybody go get a free Slurpee now.
Right.
And there's so many people, when I have a conversation with, the good people out there that will ask me questions on whatever social media platform, a lot of it comes down to confidence. How did you have a secret sauce when things are so off the rails that you could kind of gather your own emotions and be like, Jim's got this. Jim's going to figure it out no matter what. Like, what went through your head, and what does that make you think when you hear confidence, especially like in that context?
Yeah, I think I do have a secret weapon, if you will.
Amazing.
But it was partly growing up with such a troubled environment.
Yeah.
That some people, there were two directions I could go. I could have given up and become a bad kid and said, the world is against me, I'm a victim.
Yeah. Or
I could say, you know what, there's no safety net here. I'm gonna do what I can do to control my own destiny. And looking back now, that adversity that I faced as a kid ended up being my superpower. Because I can look at change, and it could be the most devastating thing in the world. I can look at it, stare it in the eye, and say, on the other side of this crisis is an opportunity.
And just for anybody that's listening that does, tell us a little bit more about your backstory relative to how you grew up, and then how you kind of jumped into this position of having a tremendous amount of education underneath your belt, and then when you can kind of lead it up to there, and then I'm going to jump back into this confidence piece, because there's people that go through a lot, and they can either, to your point, use that as a superpower to their own advantage, or they can use it potentially as a boogeyman of like, oh, well, this thing is bound to happen because this thing has happened before. But first, remind me and remind anybody listening a little bit about your background.
Yeah, it's a little embarrassing because I grew up with no running water, literally no plumbing, no indoor bathroom. We had an outhouse, and no indoor heat or air conditioning, and that wasn't the problem. that was the least of my problems, because as a kid, it was kind of like camping, no big deal.
Is that literally the way you looked at it as a kid? You're like, this is just normal, and this is
no big deal.
Yeah.
I was kind of jealous when I'd walk to school and I'd stop at friend's house and walk in. It was warm. I could smell toast cooking. It was, wow, this is amazing. But that was just the beginning of my challenges. My mom left when I was 5. She went uptown to the trailer park because they had at least a guy there that she met had running water.
Yeah.
And I walked home from school one day. My dad had been sick. I walked home from school, and there was a big red sign on the house saying condemned. And literally, the town had condemned our little shack that we were living in, and I had to move. My dad went off to the VA hospital, ended up passing away. I went with my mom to the trailer park for a short period of time. But all of that challenge, and I could go on and on, but it turned out that adversity, as I said, could have led me down a bad path of victimhood. And instead, what I discovered was I took my dad's advice and my mom's advice, and that they didn't know the path out. Neither of them graduated from high school even. But they knew that in knowledge, in books, was the answer. And that I took that seriously.
And they instilled that in you?
They instilled that in me at a very young age. My dad used to say they can take your car, they can take your things, they can take your house.
Yeah.
They did. But he said they can't take away what you know. And it sounds very fatalistic, and I hate to put it in those terms, because I look at it just the opposite. The more I learn, the more I can do.
Yeah.
So it's not a negative that everybody can take things from you. And instead, it's quite the opposite. It's the more I can learn, the more freedom I have to be my own person and to do anything I want to do in life.
I mean, you can hear it, you can live it, but to actually, as a kid, be able to refocus your brain to think that way is pretty special. And do you think that part of that is just like an inherent gift? And if so, then how does that kind of thread through up to biggest challenges from a C-level perspective and wrapping your head around all of that? I mean, did you literally sit in meetings sometimes and have that deep reflective, intentionality behind your decisions of there's no way we can't figure this out, and had a calm demeanor, or was there something else happening in your head?
You hit the nail on your head, on the head, literally. When you said it's in your head, and yes, it is. I didn't know this when I was a kid. I just did this, but then I've since discovered neuroscience and what's going on. Your head's a computer. Yep. It's programmed. Yep. It's programmed when you're a little kid to react to stimulus. There's part of your brain called the amygdala. It's programmed to fight or flight if you are threatened, right? And so what I've learned over the years is that we can reprogram our brain to react in a more favorable way. And I'll give you some examples. I mean, first of all, I coined the expression change equals opportunity because inadvertently I reprogrammed my brain as a kid that every time a crisis would happen, I'd say, stay the course, I'll get through this. Yep. And I looked at others who did the opposite. I have brothers and sisters who had a different response. Yeah. And chose victimhood or chose a negative path. Here's a great example, though. And you think, how can I program my brain to be able to react in a different way? I use the example of my pilot training. As you know, I'm an aviator. In the cockpit, you don't want that reaction to be negative, right? Right. If there's a crisis, a light goes on, you've had a dual engine fire. If I react negatively and I react out of anger or I fight, I'll over-control the airplane, the wings will rip off. If I flight, same thing. The airplane's going to spin out of control. I'm trained, and I go for training once a year to keep reprogramming my brain to make sure it works properly. In a crisis, I reach immediately to my emergency procedures checklist. And every pilot, when you're on a commercial flight, that's what they're trained to do.
So immediately something goes wrong and you go to basically a form that helps you level set and assess what's happening.
Here's what you go to. You go to knowledge. You turn on the light as if you were a kid. And you say, I don't have time to be afraid. I'm going to turn on the light. And the light is the knowledge in that book that tells you what to do in that crisis. So you reprogram your brain in training to be able to respond in a favorable, proactive way, not in a negative way. And we can do that in day in, day out in life.
And is that something then you go to, for example, being more in the public eye, right? Yeah. You've got a book that's been out for how long now? Maybe a year?
9 months.
9 months? Yeah. And that means more exposure on stuff that we've done together. You've been stopped by people that are interviewing you for, massive accounts that talk to global millionaires and billionaires. And there's always an opportunity for either one person or a lot of people to jump on a topic. Yeah. Confidence in a broader sense, especially for the day-to-day mid-manager person that's just trying to not get railroaded in a meeting, doesn't want to be late to have dinner with the person that they're dating, and just finds it so difficult across the board, and they're like, I couldn't fathom being in a bigger position because it's just going to be that much more difficult. And those are the people that are looking for some of the tips and tricks relative to confidence. Like, how do I even go to my annual performance review and feel like I showed up the right way, or just not even have, the quote-unquote Sunday scaries? Yeah. So, I mean, you have thoughts that can either take that like pilot analogy or get somebody to be just a bit more comfortable in the day-to-day relative to who they are in their own skin?
Yeah, think about the analogy I gave as a pilot
Yep.
is to have the privilege to fly in the aircraft that I fly. I have to go once a year. I'm required to go once a year, and they lock me in a simulator for 3 days. It's all about
3 days.
Oh yeah, 3 days.
Oh my God.
Literally in a two-story hydraulic simulator. Looks like something out of Star Wars. And they try to kill me for 3 days.
Oh my God.
It's a great experience. It's great fun.
No wonder you're so calm.
Yeah. But think about what that is. That's called preparation.
Yeah.
And it's no different than Tom Brady when he was preparing for a game.
Yep.
To be able to watch game tapes and get his mind programmed so that when he's in that game and something bad happens,
Yep.
he's been intercepted.
Yeah.
He's able to block that out and move on to the next play with confidence because he knows he's prepared.
Yep.
And the same thing works in the boardroom because it's about preparation. But there's another important piece that you mentioned that we forget. We take things personally. So again, it's the response. It's not the change. So I post something on the internet, and it's a positive story, and I'm really happy with the piece, and I talk about Blockbuster, for example.
Yeah.
And sure enough, someone who has perhaps never done a thing in their life will pile on and make some nasty comment about the way I led Blockbuster.
Yep.
What they're not understanding is the context of the time and the financial crisis and all the other stuff that I was dealing with. Now I have two choices. But again, I have a choice. I can see that comment and I can react negatively. I can deal with the perception. Or I can have more of a perspective. See that comment and say, it's not their fault.
Yeah.
They're dealing with perception.
Yep.
Not me. This is not personal.
Yep.
And therefore, I'm not going to react. Because my reaction, it's physics, will cause an equal and opposite reaction, right? A reaction causes an equal and opposite reaction.
Yep.
So this is what we do. We get nervous. We take things personally. We're victims of our own perceptions. And then we react. And that reaction triggers another reaction on the other side, and it gets worse and worse and worse. It spirals down.
So to translate that back, just to make sure that I understand it and try to boil it down, mostly for my own purposes here, again from a selfish perspective, because it has been a wild 150 days. This is day 151 for me since I left my job.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that would happen on any given day, especially as I kind of reconfigure my schedule and try to balance, work and home from a completely different, side of things now. It's no longer get home in time. It is, I'm in the middle of something that I need to get done from a timing perspective, and the dryer goes off. And if I'm working from home, I should go take care of that, right? Am I being selfish then? But if I don't, and my wife comes home and the laundry isn't full, and those things can become very jarring and overwhelming, especially as I'm like, all right, no more biweekly paycheck, paying for my own health insurance, kid in school, all that kind of good stuff. And so listening to what you just said, it's the understanding, whether it's somebody leaving a negative comment on something that I post or getting in my own head, is it that perception of what's happening that I then need to calibrate? So if it's, whether it's something happening to me or something that's happening around me, because that's when all of a sudden it's just like, I am not good at this side of the world. I need to go find a desk job again. So does your own perception versus perspective kind of come into this as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it is. And it's the ability to reprogram your own brain so that you're not reacting.
Yeah.
Because when that dryer goes off, you react to it.
Right.
And then your frustrations kick in. You're like, oh, damn. If I was at my desk, this wouldn't happen.
Right.
Right? So you have to let it go.
Yeah. I mean, that's been that's been the tricky part, because, and I think for a lot of people on a day in and day out basis, it's those little things, right?
Right.
And you get 50 little things that happen that start to become blockers.
Yeah.
So then the thought of doing something like really big is not even close to being on the table, right?
Right.
Write a book. A lot of people are like, you're nuts. I can't get my act together so that my laundry is done, or so that I'm, still not sure. Like, are there like really basic elements to this? If you grab somebody that's an intern,
Yeah.
and they're just kind of fumbling through a whole bunch of stuff, is there like a recalibration conversation you can have with that person to be like, this is why you're going to be okay? Or
Yeah.
is it kind of left to their own devices to kind of sort these things out?
Well, that's where coaching really can help,
Yeah.
because it comes down to it's no different than at the office. At the office, so often when we're a new employee, if we're a new guy,
Yeah.
you can get caught up in the minuscule trivia. You spend all day just responding to emails,
Yep.
or get bogged down with meetings. Meetings are a killer in the office
Yeah.
environment. They'll take forever, and sometimes they're meaningless meetings, but you feel like you have to have meetings. And
Yep.
so all of those things are distractions. So it's no different than when you leave that office environment and go home, and you walk by the TV and you see something on the news and you stop and you go, oh, wait, check this out. Or the dryer goes off, or somebody calls and says, hey, I need your help over here. And
Yep.
you've got to have the discipline. That's why I said the future's in your hands. You've got to have the discipline to rewire your reaction to all of those little stimuli that occur, to be able to sort out which ones I'm going to pay attention to, which ones I'm just going to completely ignore.
So it's almost like a little playbook in the cockpit, whether it's, I know this meeting is not going to be productive, but how do I show up and make the most of it? Or it's the dryer going off, or it's the phone call that you weren't expecting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The cockpit analogy is a good one. What they'll do sometimes is, I've got an instructor sitting behind me in the simulator,
Yep.
and he'll throw out a silly question. Hey, what do you think about this? And meanwhile, he's setting me up for failure, because something that I have to pay attention to is going to break, and I'm distracted by this conversation. And it's the same. It's a metaphor for life. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
But it's especially, and I use the aviator example because that's a life or death situation. If you get caught up in the minutia or the distractions that will naturally occur, you can put yourself in a very dangerous situation.
Yeah.
So you have to force yourself into a sense of confidence that comes from preparation, that allows you to block out self-doubt. Can I fly this airplane?
Yeah.
You better hope your pilot's not thinking that.
Right, yeah. Can I survive this meeting?
Yeah. Can I survive this crisis that's happening?
Yeah.
You have to block that stuff out and go back to your training, which is, I've got this. I can do this.
Yeah. That's amazing to hear. I mean, have you ever heard of the Energy Leadership Index? Have you ever come across that as like an executive? So it's this assessment that takes a look at how do you react in both stressful situations and non-stressful situations.
Interesting.
And it basically tells you that in obviously stressful situations, you're going to have just a different set of tools that you're going to. And it measures it in 7 different levels, where 1 is victim, 2 is anger, 3 is I'm going to win, but at your expense, 4 is you're going to win, I don't care what happens to me, 5 is we can both win, 6 is we always win, and 7 is that almost, I refer to it as, you know who Rick Rubin is?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I refer to it as like the Rick Rubin mindset, where it's just like, you're seeing creation and opportunity versus seeing an initial reaction to it. So what you're saying about the playbook and using that Energy Leadership Index almost as an example, it's like dryer goes off, meeting is bad, phone call happens, email is whatever. I need to just think of which one of these things am I going to bring to the table, and then I guess have the understanding based off of the way you're describing it that it, and I wholeheartedly believe this, so it's somewhat of a leading question, but it's like the victim, this is happening to me, is a bit of a choice.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Which is, and it's coming from you, it's a whole nother ballpark too, especially because of how the circumstances in which you were raised. Because I think a lot of people can hear that and be like, well, you just don't understand, like, my specific set of circumstances, but it kind of hits different when it comes from someone that had to endure what you had to endure at such an early age.
Well, it's interesting, though, because sometimes I have friends who say, they've heard me speak about this adversity being a superpower and stuff, and they say, yeah, well, I worry about my kids because they're growing up without any of that adversity. But here's what I usually tell them. We all have adversity.
Yeah.
It can be different forms, different degrees, but we all face adversity. So the question is, can we train ourselves under any circumstance? It doesn't have to be the nasty stuff that I had to face.
Yeah.
Can each of us train ourselves when there's an outside stimulus, a negative event, something happens, change?
Yep.
Well, we can't do anything about that.
Right.
But what we can do is manage our response to it.
Yeah.
And so if we can consciously work on managing our response to change, then we can turn any level of adversity into opportunity.
Yeah, it's remarkable the power that can have if you can sustain that too, right?
Oh, it's huge.
Like in a one-off situation, you can get, at first, my humble opinion, it can feel like it's far more difficult, but it's like one of those, you make the adjustment and then it happens like, oh, that wasn't that bad, and that actually felt okay afterwards. It's like, all right, eat your broccoli, and you're like, oh my God, this is horrible. You're like, well, actually eating healthy, I do kind of feel better. And at first that was but also for those that may not have had as extreme of circumstances as you had grown up.
Which I don't wish on anybody.
Right. But to the point of everybody has their own, my humble opinion, I would love your take on this. It's like, with all the stuff that's happening in the world at a global scale, and kind of understanding just the genuine unfairness of, there's a family right now that's dealing with a child that has cancer. Tens of thousands of families, probably just in the U.S. alone, right? Like, and then even if you hadn't gone through something yourself, it's almost like a broader awareness and understanding that adversity is going to be there and in all kinds of shapes and sizes. So even if you don't necessarily have the biggest pile on your own plate, if you can kind of appreciate that in a broader sense, you're probably doing better than you give yourself credit for, maybe?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Does that make any sense?
No, absolutely. Plus, there's another important point that is a little more subtle. A lot of the times, the things we're facing are caused by someone else's reaction. And what we don't know is what they're going through.
Right.
So they could be facing that horrible, devastating child with cancer.
Yep.
You just don't know.
Yeah.
And so you're in a boardroom and they're blowing up at you and you're going, my gosh, what did I do to deserve this?
Yeah, it's it reminds me of something I heard. It was funny. It's like a quote that I heard from a person. It's like, this isn't my quote, and they didn't even remember who the quote was from. That we constantly go through life with the perception of what we think someone else is thinking about us.
Exactly.
Which takes it so far removed that it's not even like what we think about ourselves first. It's how we think the other person might be thinking of what we're doing. And so with what you just said in mind, it's when it comes to that gut reaction of like, this person is snapping at me for whatever reason, or this thing is going wrong, or whatever situation is kind of off the rails, in a lot of cases you're putting so much weight into the way you're assuming the other person is assuming something back at you versus just being steady and kind of holding your ground, so to speak, with that understanding of, I don't know what this person is going through. And in that case, I mean, is benefit of the doubt an incorrect way to describe a thought that you could have relative to, this is all over the map? There's anger, there's fear, there's whatever's happening from a work perspective or God knows what else. But if you can give benefit of the doubt, and it's something I defaulted to. I don't know if that's the correct way.
Yeah.
But, I mean, do you think benefit of the doubt can help in that general sense?
It can. Again, it's your response to their reaction that matters. So if you respond negatively back at them, it's just going to spiral out of control and get worse and worse.
Yeah.
So stepping back, and you said it again, their perception of you is driving their reaction.
Right. And it's your assumption too. Which is the wild part, is you're making an assumption about what you think they're thinking.
Correct.
Which then further removes your control from the situation and puts so much more control into their hands.
Correct. As opposed to stepping back and having the broader perspective and saying, I don't know why they're behaving this way, but I need to take it down a different path, perhaps, de-escalate this discussion because it's not going in a constructive fashion.
Yeah.
It's easier said than done. I mean, I make this all sound so easy.
I mean, that's part of the reason why I'm trying to infuse some of the things that I have seen, but then also what's that piece, because it works.
Yeah.
Like it flat out works. I mean, we've had a lot of conversations off the record when we're having fun filming stuff and we're, chatting about things in 7-Eleven and why there's not as much onigiri as there should be on the shelves around here. And, some of the stories of the things that I've been through, and I really don't think I would have survived 90% of those broader situations if I wasn't able to, in my own way, just take a step back and be like, I need to digest this first. Like, funny, I don't think I gave myself credit for being smart enough to be like, I just need to have a snap reaction to something and then go with it. And that put me in a default mode of, tell me more about that, which was a trick that was taught me right out of the gate when I got my first executive level role, of asking the question, tell me more about that. And that can be like a super powerful way to just kind of like level set so that you don't, it's almost like before I even know if I have to go to the handbook, like let me just kind of soak in what's happening a bit more.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's pervasive. Like, I think it's a combination of things happening in the world, general unease about corporate America, especially from younger generations' perspective, and just this sense of dread, unfortunately, seems to be out there a lot, and it comes back and it just weighs on people's confidence, that then just kind of sends them into the spiral that we're talking about, and it just makes life less enjoyable when you're not able to be like, it's going to be okay, let me just kind of check that playbook.
Remember, I don't know if you remember Yoda in Star Wars?
Of course.
Yoda said, Luke, fear leads to the dark side.
Yeah.
And it's so true.
Yeah.
I mean, it leads to negativity. It leads to self-doubt. It leads to anger. It leads to frustration. It could lead to violence and hatred. I mean, if you think of some of the problems in the world, stem from fear.
Yeah.
And so his advice to Luke was to use knowledge and the Force, which to me is kind of a metaphor for faith, whatever faith you believe in.
Yep.
But if you've got a belief and you've got the ability to have knowledge, there's really nothing that we should fear in this on this earth.
Yeah, I always equate it to lack of control can drive fear.
Exactly.
And so whether that's a boss that's just like very quick to become angry about something, it's because they can't make the keystrokes themselves. They feel like something is out of control, and therefore anger is the way to help bridge that gap.
Exactly.
And for some reason, the thought of how that even translates to somebody stuck in traffic when they're really mad.
Yeah.
they're mad at the circumstance, obviously, but it's because they can't control what's happening.
Right.
And therefore, they're just like, I'm going to snap into victim state and anger and
blame the other driver.
and blame. And it's like, how do you recalibrate your mind so that, say you're stuck in traffic and you see sirens in the distance, and you can kind of just like soak it in, be like, as long as I'm not one of the people that's actually in that circumstance that's causing this traffic, I'm good. It doesn't make it suck any less that you're stuck in traffic.
Right.
But at the same time too, like what good is it doing to react in that way? Again, easier said than done, but
yeah,
it can make a huge difference.
Here's an angle that I've used, and I think it's helpful to recognize that. Well, I use a quote actually from Nelson Mandela. I mean, think about a guy that was locked up for 20 plus years, right? He could be pretty bitter and angry, and talk about somebody who has good reason to feel like a victim. Mm-hmm. But when he was in prison, he studied law. And he got a group of his fellow inmates together, and they all had legal text, and they were testing each other back and forth. They spent years studying law. Came out as president of the country. Yeah. But his lesson was, I never fail. I win or I learn. And if we can learn from each of those situations, whether it's, a bad boss. I'm asked all the time, what about your mentors? I said, some of my best mentors have been my worst bosses.
Yeah, same.
Because I learned from them what not to do.
Exact same. That's amazing to hear you say that.
Yeah, it's a learning experience.
Yeah.
So bad boss, okay. No big deal. I'm going to learn what not to do as a boss.
Yeah. It's amazing. Sometimes you're given these super weird gifts that just like pop up. And you're like, God, this seems like the worst hand to be dealt. But if you can actually take that step back and look at the cockpit playbook, you can learn a tremendous amount.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Cool.
It's a gift, as you said. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you ends up being a gift that you never thought it would be. You're sitting around going, woe is me, and it turned out could have been the best thing that ever happened.
Yeah, totally. We're at Google. You're here right on time.
Yeah, this is awesome. This is going to be a great experience. I'm gonna.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about change and social media and how guys like you, ironically, are in a really good position to help change the world. And here's my angle. See if you agree with it.
Okay.
That fear is causing people to say we should ban TikTok.
Yep.
We should get rid of phones. We shouldn't let kids be on their phone.
Yeah.
And it's fear-based. Mm-hmm. But think about it. That's like going back and saying we shouldn't let people on the internet because they might look at bad stuff.
Yeah.
And look what the internet's done.
Right. Or even the newspaper or the radio.
Exactly. It's throughout history. Anytime there's change, people fear it. So my message to these influencers and social media people that are developing this new communications channel, which is really what it's all about, is that you guys have a fabulous opportunity to teach. And I'm using my Mr. Beast example, right?
Yeah.
So I'll go out with Mr. Beast with a scholarship encouraging young people to post a video saying why education is important to them.
Yep.
And now I've got kids from all over the world posting up videos, sharing with their friends the importance of education.
Yeah.
How that's a great example from my perspective of taking something that could be perceived as a negative, social media, TikTok, and I'm turning it into a really positive way of helping teach young people the power of education.
Yeah.
And you've got that same opportunity. You're doing it every day.
I'm trying, man. When my confidence is in the right spot, I'm trying my ass off.
You're the best. You're the best at what you do.
Jim, thank you, man. This is what an absolute treat. What an absolute treat. Glad you needed a ride.
Yeah. Well, I'm going from new guy with you to new guy with Google today. So.
Amazing. All right, cool. I think we're good. I think that all worked out.